We put it on tape. We just met you, but
All
we'll
right.
forget your name in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, no worries. Jason Herring, last name's Herring, just like the bank, no relation. But I'm the 47th District Attorney here, newly appointed by Governor Abbott back here on the 15th of August. Been with the office since 2006.
Is it J-A-S-O-N or
Yes, sir. J-A-S-O-N.
Okay.
Afternoon. I wanted to talk to you guys this morning. Potter County Grand Jury reviewed and considered the complete investigation of an officer-involved shooting that occurred in the 3600 block of Northeast 9th Avenue on July 9th of this year, in the evening of July 9th. APD officers out doing their job on the street made a traffic stop for violations on a vehicle occupied by 3 people that evening. During the course of that traffic stop, one of the occupants of the car, a gentleman by the name of Andrew Norton, decided it was time to employ unlawful deadly force by using a firearm, presenting a firearm to APD officers. Obviously, they responded in kind, and Mr. Norton's actions that evening resulted not only in his death, but the death of a fellow occupant of that vehicle by the name of Mrs. Cedra Castillo. We spent several hours this morning with the grand jury presenting the full content of that investigation to them. Obviously, we presented the law and all the facts that we have. As you can see, it's been a little while. Here, there was some significant forensic evidence that we waited on in order to be able to provide the grand jury with everything they needed to make the intelligent choice with regard to this investigation. In the end of the day, the grand jury, through their deliberations, found that not only were the officers' actions justified in their response with deadly force to that unlawful force used by Mr. Norton, justified. However, the unintended consequences in the death of Mrs. Cedra Castillo were also justified. Our Texas Penal Code, Chapter 9, deals with justification and self-defense. Obviously, our law anticipates that we may have a circumstance like this where an innocent third party is either injured or killed as the result in a response to an unlawful use of deadly force. That would decouple, or that justification usually flows through. In other words, if the justification is there for the officer's use of deadly force against Mr. Norton, that justification would flow through the unintended consequences of that action with regard to Ms. Castillo, unless there is evidence of recklessness, reckless acts on the part of the officers that resulted in that unintended injury or death to that innocent third party. Clearly, the grand jury found zero evidence of that. Our officers acted appropriately according to their training, doing their duty, and unfortunately we had a circumstance where that 905 of the Texas Penal Code came in, and the grand jurors had to consider the unintended consequences to Ms. Castillo. But in the end of the day, this was, they found that both justification for the use of force against Mr. Norton and for the unintended consequences to Ms. Castillo. I want to, forward my sincere condolences not only to Mr. Norton's family and Ms. Castillo's family, but to the officers and in their families. No one that's involved in one of these instances is able to walk away, unscathed or unaffected.
Were there any other weapons in the car, do you know?
No.
No, just the one.
Just the one.
Do we have a number of how many officers were involved?
There were several officers on scene, but there were 2 officers who were directly involved in responding to that unlawful use of force by Mr. Norton.
And then do you know how many shots were fired or anything more specific on that?
All that, yeah, there were a total of 23 rounds fired. Obviously, the training that our officers receive and the practices they go through is when they are required to respond with deadly force in a situation. They are very well trained, and they respond to that threat until they have stopped the threat. And that will give you an indication as to how the number of rounds comes into play there as you make sure that you've stopped the threat.
Did Mr. Norton fire his gun?
He did not get a round off, but he presented a loaded weapon and pointed it directly at 2 APD officers.
If you can touch on that a little bit, just anything for the community to take away when a citizen does point a gun at law enforcement, and again, the right they have, right citizens have with a weapon like that.
Well, that's a great question. Officers, just like the rest of us, they're not peace officers. We've got a right to protect ourselves. 931, 932 of the Penal Code deal with self-defense, and 933 is defense of a third person. Obviously, it's not a good idea when you're out there in the world to display a weapon really to anyone unless you intend to use it. Right? Our officers and just you and I as citizens can't afford to take the risk that we all want to go home, and we all want the right thing to happen for us and ours. And when a weapon's presented like that, I just personally, I'll speak for myself. I'm not going to take the risk that you're going to be kind to me. So you respond to that unlawful use of deadly force the only way that they can, which is to not only protect themselves but everybody else that's in and around that area. So it's my advice to you is comply with officers, and they'll treat you right if you treat them right.
This may not be a question you can answer. Do you know what the round capacity of each officer has within their specific guns? Because 23 would assume in my mind that it's over 13 or over 12.
Right. And the weapons. I'm not a Glock guy. Most of our peace officers in Amarillo, it's probably the most common weapon is say a Glock 17 or a Glock 19, but it's more than 13.
Okay.
I can't recall some of the Glock 17, 19, 21 rounds, depends on your magazine, things like that, but it was, and our officers in this case, absolutely, one of the things that's always considered by us as prosecutors and by the grand jury is was there an excessive use of force. There's absolutely zero evidence of that here. Officers are trained and they respond to a presented threat, and they will continue to respond to that threat until there is no longer a threat, and that's what always ends up being, here they got it just right. Unfortunately, there were some unintended consequences, especially to Miss Castillo. Nobody ever likes to see officer-involved shootings happen at all. Like I said, our law does anticipate things like this, and it's one of those things we see coming, and so we deal with it. And that their excessive force is always a consideration in any use of force, whether it's officers or a citizen. But here, absolutely zero evidence that any more force that was, and that's one of the things grand juries and prosecutors always consider is was force excessive, because that can decouple things as well. However, here you react until the threat stops, and we could have asked for a better outcome, but I couldn't have asked for a better response by our officers. Our APD, Park County, our law enforcement here in the Panhandle is very well trained, and they've responded absolutely appropriately in every circumstance that I've been seen since I've been here in the office since 2006, and this is no different. It's one of the questions. It's a great question. It's one of the questions we often deal with. But law enforcement is trained to make sure that threat stops, and not only are they not hurt, but all the folks that are around and live and work and might be wandering up and down the street or driving by in that area are also not affected by this.
There was 3 people in the car. Was there any charges on the third person?
There were some misdemeanor traffic citations, but no. Obviously, our office, 47th DA's office, we deal with just felony offenses. But those are part of the foundation for the reason for the stop.
Can you tell me the relationship of where everybody was in the vehicle when the happened started?
The driver, Mr. De Los Santos, I believe is his name. You'll have to forgive me. I can't remember his last name right off the top of my head. Was the driver of the vehicle. Miss Castillo was the front right passenger, and Mr. Norton was in the rear right passenger seat. So that's where people were placed.
Going off of that, just the initial stop, you might not be able to answer it, but is due to like the license plate not matching the vehicle. So was there anything else with that ended up being charged, or anything else that came with
Well,
that?
I'll just say that was the primary reason for the stop. Obviously, if you have any kind of traffic violation, then and the license plate did play into this significantly. That was the primary reason for the stop.
And from the evidence that it showed, this may be hard for you to answer. When the person's gun was saw and they started firing, do we have an idea of how many shots it taken from that go downward?
What I'll say is this: it was the entire incident from the time that Mr. Norton stepped up from the vehicle till the end of it was about 7.5 seconds. The traffic stop had been kind of a prolonged incident. Obviously, officers, when they're first on a traffic stop, are going to be on heightened awareness as they approach your car and they start to talk. Everything seemed like it was going well here, and then due to the decisions and actions of Mr. Norton, this thing turned out in a very unexpected and unfortunate way.
Did you, I don't know if you tell me this or not, but did Mr. Norton have any kind of criminal history or background?
I won't comment on that.
And I guess my concern with someone would be, and this stop may be very different than others, but let's say somebody presents a weapon, but we don't know who's in the car. Should maybe more caution be somewhat exercised? I know that's hard for you to
No, I
comment.
get you. I get where you're coming from, but the simple fact here is what I will say with regard to that is kind of like I said earlier, our peace officers in Amarillo and Potter County and Armstrong counties, the folks that I deal with are very well trained. And I won't try to Monday morning quarterback those folks, but I'll put it this way, unfortunately this thing happened and the consequences that flowed from it happened, but there was nothing that could have been done any different in this instance to on the part of the officers to avoid what the outflow was. They, like I said earlier, it's a response to a deadly force situation, and came out with some bad consequences for Ms. Castillo and Mr. Norton, but Mr. Norton made those choices, and there's nothing that I could say that would have made any difference. The officers responded absolutely appropriately in accordance with their training, and did what, if this happened 10 times, I would expect that they would respond the same way each time. The actions of our peace officers were spot on.
And then,
Go ahead.
just clarification with Ms. Castillo. Did she get in the way of shots, or was she directly shot at?
No, she is. I'll put it this way: there were numerous people on a traffic stop. There were not just the occupants of the vehicle, but several officers in very close proximity to Mr. Norton when he presented that weapon and pointed it right at an officer and got his finger in that trigger guard. So, in those kind of situations, your choices are limited. As either a citizen or a peace officer, you've been presented with a deadly weapon threat, and you have to respond the best way you can, like that.
Okay, going forward, I guess they were on administrative leave, or are they back on regular patrol now?
I'll defer that question to Chief Birkenfeld, but I believe the answer is yes. It's a standard practice in my experience as a prosecutor that officers that are involved in this are put on administrative leave, not because they've done anything wrong, but just so that we can complete our investigation and present it to the grand jury for a decision on charges or not. What's going to happen was their justification before those officers are back out on the street. So I believe, based on the policy, I would say that yes, after in my experience, but that would be a question for Chief Birkenfeld. But those two officers, I'm sure, will be back to regular duty for them if they're not already.
And you don't expect this is the end of, you don't expect any other action?
I didn't hear you.
You don't expect any other court?
No, sir. Well, all I can speak to is the felony criminal consequences and the felony investigation. I don't have any personal knowledge, but just general life experience tells me that there's likely to be ongoing legal review outside of the criminal purview here, and I can't speak to that other than just common sense tells me that might be occurring or might occur. So.
How long did the grand jury deliberate this?
We started at 8:30 this morning, and we're finished by probably 11:15. It's a fairly lengthy amount of time that we spend on, which is as it should be. And we make sure that everything, I'll say the complete content of our investigation is disclosed. We talk to them about the law. We let them review all the facts. We answer all the questions that they have. And of course, then we leave the room and they deliberate. And if they have questions of us during that deliberation, they call us back in and we address those.
We're good? We're good.
Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, thanks. I think I'm good.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you guys coming out. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
While you're there, I'm going to take a